I learned the hard way that living in a homeowner association meant surrendering control to people who thrived on manufactured power, and nothing prepared me for the day Sharon Pemberton decided to solve her water drainage problem by creating mine. My name is Stephen Oakes, and I bought my house in Riverside Meadows, a planned community in Aurora, Colorado, back in 2023. The neighborhood looked perfect with its manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and strict architectural guidelines that promised property values would remain high. I was 34, single, working remotely as a software engineer, and I thought I had found my forever home. The house was a modest two-story with a finished basement where I set up my home office and gaming room. Everything was going great until Sharon Pemberton became HOA president in early 2026. Sharon was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA Karren. She was 52 years old with that specific haircut that demanded to speak to managers everywhere. Her blonde highlights were always fresh, her athleisure outfits always coordinated, and her pearl earrings never missed a board meeting. She lived 3 houses down from me in a larger colonial-style home with her husband Greg, who I rarely saw because he seemed to work constantly just to avoid being home. The trouble started in March, when we had an unusually wet spring. Sharon's property sat on slightly higher ground than mine, and apparently her backyard was collecting water near her patio. Instead of dealing with it like a normal person by hiring a landscaper or consulting with neighbors, Sharon decided to use her position as HOA president to authorize a drainage solution. I did not find out about any of this until it was too late. I was in my basement office on a Tuesday morning, debugging some code for a client project, when I heard an odd sound. At first, I thought my washing machine was acting up, but the noise was coming from the opposite side of the basement. I walked over to investigate and felt my sock get wet. Looking down, I saw water seeping through the corner of the basement floor near the foundation wall. My heart dropped. I ran upstairs and outside to see what was happening. That is when I noticed the construction crew in Sharon's backyard. There were 3 workers in reflective vests digging a trench that ran from her patio area directly toward the property line between our houses. A large corrugated drainage pipe was being installed, and I watched in horror as one of the workers connected it to what looked like a discharge point aimed right at my foundation. "Hey!" I shouted, jogging over. "What are you doing?" One of the workers, a middle-aged guy with a thick mustache, looked up. "Installing drainage for the homeowner? You got a problem?" "That's draining straight toward my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You cannot just dump water at my foundation." The worker shrugged. "Lady who hired us said it was approved. Talk to her." I turned and saw Sharon standing on her back deck, arms crossed, watching the whole scene with a satisfied expression. I walked over to her fence line. "Sharon, what is going on? Are you installing a drainage pipe that empties toward my house?" She gave me that condescending smile that I would come to know very well. "Stephen, this is an approved HOA improvement project. My property was experiencing drainage issues, and as president, I authorized the necessary corrections." "You cannot just flood my property," I said, feeling my face get hot. "Water's already coming into my basement." "That is not my problem," Sharon replied coolly. "Perhaps your foundation has issues. You should get that checked. The HOA Architectural Committee approved this drainage modification last week." "I'm on the Architectural Committee," I said. "We never had a meeting about this." Sharon's smile tightened. "We had an emergency session. You must not have received the email." I pulled out my phone right there and checked. Nothing. I never got any notification. Technology issues are not my concern. The project is approved and permitted. If you have complaints, you can submit them in writing to the board, and we will review them at next month's meeting." "Next month? My basement is flooding right now?" Sharon turned and walked into her house without another word. I stood there, furious and helpless, watching as the workers continued installing a drainage system that was actively destroying my home. I rushed back inside and down to the basement. The water was spreading now, pooling across the concrete floor. I grabbed every towel I owned and tried to create a barrier, but it was useless. The water kept coming. I called an emergency plumber and he arrived within 2 hours. The plumber, a guy named Dave who had been working in Aurora for 20 years, took one look at the situation and shook his head. You have water coming through your foundation from external pressure. This is not a plumbing issue. Something outside is pushing water at your house. My neighbor just installed a drainage pipe that empties right at my foundation, I explained. Dave's eyebrows shot up. She did what? That is completely illegal. You cannot discharge drainage water at a neighboring property. That violates county codes and basic property rights. You need to document this and get a lawyer. Can you help me stop the water for now? I can install a temporary sump pump system in your basement to remove the water as it comes in, but that is just a band-aid. The real solution is forcing your neighbor to relocate that discharge point away from your property. Dave installed a sump pump that afternoon, costing me $800. The pump ran continuously, ejecting water out through a hose that drained to the street. My basement was wet, my carpet was ruined, and I could see water damage starting to show on the drywall. I spent that evening documenting everything. I took photos of Sharon's drainage pipe, the discharge point, my flooded basement, and the water damage. I filmed video showing the water flowing from her property to mine. Then I started researching Colorado property law and HOA regulations. What I found made me even angrier. Sharon had absolutely no right to discharge water onto my property. Colorado law clearly stated that property owners cannot alter drainage patterns in ways that damage neighboring properties. The HOA also had no authority to approve a project that violated county codes or harmed another homeowner's property. Sharon had abused her position and either lied about getting approval or held a fake meeting to rubber stamp her own project. The next morning, I drafted a formal complaint letter to the HOA board and hand-delivered copies to all 5 board members. Sharon was president, but there were 4 other members: Tom Hendricks, vice president; Linda Martinez, treasurer; Robert Chen, secretary; and Jessica Patterson, member-at-large. I made sure to document the delivery of each letter with photos showing the timestamp. The letter detailed the drainage installation, the flooding of my basement, the damage caused, and the legal violations involved. I demanded immediate removal of the drainage pipe, restoration of my property, and compensation for damages. I gave them 72 hours to respond before I would take legal action. Sharon called me that afternoon. I did not recognize the number, so I answered. "Stephen, this is Sharon Pemberton. I received your little letter, and I have to say I am very disappointed. The HOA does not respond well to threats." "That was not a threat, Sharon. That was a formal complaint about illegal activity that is destroying my property. The drainage installation was properly approved. Your flooding issues are separate and not the responsibility of the HOA or myself personally. Sharon, your pipe is literally pointing at my foundation and pumping water into my basement. I have video evidence." Video can be misleading. I suggest you consult with a professional about your property's drainage problems. Now, if you continue this harassment, I will have no choice but to fine you for creating a hostile environment within the community. I almost laughed. "You are threatening to fine me because you are flooding my house? I am informing you of potential consequences for your behavior. Good day, Stephen." She hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, amazed at the audacity. This woman had damaged my property, refused to take responsibility, and was now threatening me with HOA fines for complaining about it. I did not wait the full 72 hours. That afternoon, I called a lawyer named Patricia Holmes, who specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. Her office was in downtown Denver, and she agreed to see me the next morning. Patricia was in her mid-40s, sharp, professional, and direct. I laid out the entire situation, showed her my documentation, and explained Sharon's response. "This is one of the clearer cases I've seen," Patricia said after reviewing everything. "Your neighbor has committed what we call trespass by water. She has intentionally altered drainage to discharge onto your property, causing damage. The HOA's approval, even if it was legitimate, does not override county building codes or property law. You have multiple avenues for legal action. What do you recommend?" First, we send a formal demand letter from this office to Sharon Pemberton personally and to the HOA board. We demand immediate cessation of the discharge, removal or relocation of the drainage system, and compensation for all damages. We give them 10 days. If they do not comply, we file suit in county court for trespass, property damage, and injunctive relief. How much is this going to cost me? I can work on contingency for the damages portion, meaning I get paid a percentage of what we recover. For the injunctive relief to stop the drainage, I will need a retainer of $3,000. Given the clear liability here, I am confident we will prevail, and you will recover all legal fees from the defendants. I agreed, and Patricia got to work immediately. By that afternoon, demand letters had been sent via certified mail and email to Sharon Pemberton, the HOA board, and Sharon's husband, Greg Pemberton, since they jointly owned the property. The letters were brutal and detailed. Patricia outlined every violation, every dollar of damage, and the legal consequences if they did not comply. She demanded $40,000 in damages for the flooded basement, ruined finishes, damaged property, emergency repairs, and diminished property value. She also demanded immediate injunctive relief requiring the drainage discharge to be relocated away from my property within 7 days. Sharon's response came not from a lawyer, but from her personally, via email to the entire HOA community. She sent a mass message to all homeowners in Riverside Meadows titled, "Regarding False Accusations." In the email, Sharon claimed that I was making frivolous legal threats to avoid paying HOA dues. I was current on all dues, that my property had pre-existing drainage problems. It did not. And that I was harassing her personally because I disagreed with HOA rules. She painted herself as a victim of a vindictive homeowner and asked for community support. It backfired spectacularly. Within hours, I started getting emails and calls from other homeowners. Apparently, Sharon had been a nightmare as HOA president for the past 3 months. She had been issuing arbitrary fines, demanding expensive property modifications, and generally acting like a tyrant. My situation was just the most egregious example, and other homeowners saw it as an opportunity to push back. Tom Hendricks, the vice president, called me directly. "Stephen, I want you to know that most of the board had no idea about Sharon's drainage project. She told us it was routine maintenance on her own property within her lot lines. If we had known she was discharging onto your land, we never would have approved it." "Was there actually an architectural committee meeting?" I asked. Tom sighed. Sharon sent an email to the committee members with a vague description of drainage improvements and said that unless anyone objected within 24 hours, it would be considered approved. I did not think anything of it because she made it sound like it was entirely on her property. This is completely on her, not the HOA. "I appreciate you telling me that. My lawyer's going after Sharon personally and the HOA as an entity, but if the board cooperates and makes this right, we can probably minimize the HOA's liability. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. Can you attend and present your case?" I agreed, and the meeting was scheduled for the following evening at the community clubhouse. Patricia advised me to attend, but to let her do most of the talking. The meeting was packed. Apparently, word had spread, and at least 30 homeowners showed up in addition to the board members. Sharon sat at the head of the table, looking furious. Patricia and I sat in the front row. Tom Hendricks called the meeting to order. "We are here to discuss the drainage dispute between Board President Sharon Pemberton and homeowner Stephen Oakes. Stephen has made serious allegations, and we need to get to the bottom of this." Sharon immediately interrupted. "This is highly irregular. We should not be airing private disputes in a public forum." "You made it public when you sent that email to the entire community," Tom replied. "Stephen, would you like to present your case?" Patricia stood. "I am Patricia Holmes, attorney for Stephen Oakes. I will be brief. On March 15th, Sharon Pemberton installed a drainage pipe on her property that discharges water directly at my client's foundation. This has caused severe flooding in his basement, resulting in significant property damage. This discharge violates County Code, Section 3015-208, which prohibits altering natural drainage to the detriment of neighboring properties. It also constitutes common law trespass. We have photographic and video evidence." Patricia pulled up photos on the clubhouse projector. The images clearly showed Sharon's drainage pipe, the water flow, and my flooded basement. Several homeowners gasped. "We have sent demand letters requiring removal of the drainage discharge and compensation for damages. If this is not resolved within the specified time frame, we will file suit in Arapahoe County District Court." Sharon stood up, her face red. This is absurd. My property was flooding. I had every right to fix my drainage. If his basement has problems, that is not my fault. Ms. Pemberton, Patricia said calmly, you do not have the right to fix your drainage by flooding your neighbor's property. That is the fundamental principle of property law. You can drain your water anywhere you want on your own property, but the moment it crosses onto someone else's land and causes damage, you are liable. The HOA approved this project, Sharon insisted. Tom Hendricks spoke up. Sharon, you told us the drainage work was entirely within your property boundaries. You never mentioned discharging onto Stephen's land. If you had, we would have required you to consult with an engineer and get county approval, which you clearly do not have. Linda Martinez, the treasurer, added, I move that the HOA formally withdraw any approval for Sharon's drainage project and require her to immediately cease. Motion passes, Tom declared. Sharon, you are hereby notified that the HOA does not approve of your drainage discharge onto Stephen's property, and you are required to cease immediately. Any further actions you take are your personal responsibility, not the HOA's. Sharon stood up abruptly. Fine, I will fix my drainage without the HOA's help, but Stephen, you are going to regret this. I will make your life in this community miserable. She stormed out. The room was silent for a moment, and then several homeowners started clapping. One woman I did not know well, named Carol, stood up. I just want to say that Sharon has been abusing her power since she became president. I got fined $300 because my mailbox flag was the wrong shade of red. This is exactly the kind of overreach we have been dealing with. Other homeowners voiced similar complaints. The meeting turned into an impromptu referendum on Sharon's presidency. By the end, a motion was made to hold a special election to recall Sharon from the board. The motion passed with overwhelming support from the homeowners present. I went home that night feeling vindicated but exhausted. My basement was still flooding, my sump pump was still running constantly, and I had thousands of dollars in damages. The legal process was just beginning. Over the next week, Sharon did nothing to fix the drainage situation. Water continued flowing from her property to mine. My sump pump ran 24/7, and I was terrified it would fail. I had to move everything out of my basement because the humidity was causing mold growth. My home office was relocated to my bedroom, and my gaming equipment was packed in boxes in the garage. Patricia filed for an emergency temporary restraining order in Arapahoe County District Court. We requested that the court immediately order Sharon to cease discharging water onto my property, pending a full hearing. The motion was filed on March 28th, and a hearing was scheduled for April 2nd. Sharon showed up to court without a lawyer. She represented herself, which Patricia said was a huge mistake. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Marilyn Foster, reviewed our evidence and listened to both sides. I testified about the flooding, the damage, and my failed attempts to resolve it. Patricia presented photos, videos, and the plumber's report. Sharon argued that she had a right to manage drainage on her property and that I was exaggerating the damage. Judge Foster looked at Sharon with barely concealed irritation. Ms. Pemberton, did you or did you not install a drainage pipe that discharges water toward Mr. Oakes's property? I installed drainage to solve a problem on my property, yes. And that drainage discharges water that flows onto his property? Sharon hesitated. The water has to go somewhere. But not onto your neighbor's property, Ms. Pemberton. This is basic law. I am granting the temporary restraining order. You have 72 hours to cease all discharge of water onto Mr. Oakes's property. If you fail to comply, you will be in contempt of court. Do you understand? Your Honor, I need time to hire a contractor to relocate the drainage. You have 72 hours. If you need to cap the pipe temporarily until you can relocate it properly, then do that. But the discharge onto Mr. Oakes's property stops now. This court will reconvene in 2 weeks for a full hearing on damages and permanent injunction. Sharon left the courthouse looking shell-shocked. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Finally, someone with authority had told Sharon she was wrong. True to form, Sharon did not comply within 72 hours. She capped the pipe on her property, which stopped the water from flowing to my house, but she did not relocate the discharge. Instead, the water started pooling in her yard again, and she apparently decided that was preferable to admitting she needed to do the work properly. Meanwhile, the recall election was moving forward. The HOA bylaws required a petition signed by 20% of homeowners to trigger a recall vote, and that threshold was reached within days. A special election was scheduled for late April. Sharon tried to campaign, sending emails defending her record and attacking her critics, but it was hopeless. The community had turned against her. On April 23rd, the votes were counted, and Sharon was removed from the board with an 82% recall vote. Tom Hendricks became interim president. The permanent injunction hearing was held on April 16th. This time, Sharon brought a lawyer, a young guy who looked fresh out of law school. He tried to argue that the drainage issue was a matter of HOA jurisdiction and that the court should defer to the HOA's internal processes. Judge Foster was not having it. Counselor, the HOA already withdrew approval for this project and voted to recall your client from her position. There is no HOA defense here. This is a straightforward property dispute. Patricia presented a detailed accounting of my damages. The basement flooding had destroyed the carpet, damaged drywall, ruined baseboards, and caused mold growth that required professional remediation. I had also incurred costs for the emergency plumber, the sump pump installation, electricity to run the pump constantly, storage for my belongings, and diminished property value. The total came to $43,000. Patricia also presented evidence of my emotional distress, lost work time, and the ongoing stress of dealing with Sharon's harassment. She requested the full $40,000 originally demanded, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages for Sharon's willful misconduct. Sharon's lawyer argued that the damages were inflated and that Sharon had acted in good faith to solve a legitimate problem on her property. He requested that any damages be limited to direct repair costs and that no punitive damages be awarded. Judge Foster took the matter under advisement and said she would issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. Those were the longest 2 weeks of my life. I was anxious about whether I would actually recover anything, and meanwhile, my house was still a mess. The ruling came down on May 1st. Judge Foster found in my favor on every count. She awarded me $43,000 in compensatory damages, covered all my legal fees, and added $10,000 in punitive damages because Sharon had willfully ignored the temporary restraining order and continued to cause harm even after being ordered to stop. The total judgment was $53,000 plus legal fees, which came to another $12,000. Sharon owed me $65,000. Patricia called me with the news, and I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. "So what happens now?" I asked. "We serve Sharon with the judgment and demand payment. If she does not pay, we can put a lien on her property, garnish her wages, or seize assets. Most people pay rather than deal with those consequences." Sharon did not pay. Instead, her lawyer filed an appeal, which meant the judgment was stayed pending the appeal process. Patricia warned me this could take months or even years. I was frustrated, but determined. In the meantime, I filed a claim with Sharon's homeowner's insurance company. Patricia advised me that the insurance might cover the damage since it resulted from work Sharon did on her property, even though it was intentional. I sent a claim letter to Sharon's insurance company, Liberty National Insurance, detailing the damage and attaching the court judgment. To my surprise, Liberty National opened a claim investigation immediately. An adjuster named Marcus Williams was assigned to my case. Marcus came to my house in mid-May to inspect the damage. By then, I had already started some repairs because I could not live with a destroyed basement indefinitely. I had hired a mold remediation company to treat the mold, replaced the carpet with vinyl plank flooring, and repaired the drywall. I kept all receipts and before and after photos. Marcus spent 2 hours documenting everything. He took his own photos, interviewed me about the timeline, reviewed my documentation, and examined Sharon's drainage pipe from my backyard. He was thorough and professional. I have to tell you," Marcus said as he was leaving, "this is pretty clear-cut liability. Your neighbor caused damage to your property through her actions. The court judgment helps too because it establishes fault. I'm going to recommend that we cover this claim. Even though Sharon intentionally installed the drainage, I thought insurance did not cover intentional acts. It is a gray area. She intentionally installed the drainage to solve her problem, but she probably did not intend to flood your basement specifically. She was negligent and reckless, but not malicious in the legal sense. That is usually enough for coverage. Plus, we would rather pay your claim than have you sue us for bad faith if we deny it. I thanked Marcus and waited. Insurance companies are not known for speed, and I prepared myself for a long wait. To my shock, Liberty National made an offer 3 weeks later. They offered to pay the full $65,000 of the court judgment plus an additional $20,000 to cover incidental damages, my time, and as a settlement to prevent any future claims. The total offer was $85,000. Patricia reviewed the offer and advised me to take it. This is an excellent settlement. They are essentially paying the judgment plus extra to close the book on this. You should accept. I signed the settlement agreement on June 9th. The check arrived on June 16th. $85,000. I stood in my kitchen staring at the check, hardly believing it was real. Sharon's insurance company then went after Sharon for reimbursement, which was their right under subrogation. Liberty National sued Sharon to recover the $85,000 they paid me, arguing that she had violated her policy by failing to disclose the drainage work and by ignoring the court orders. That was Sharon's problem now, not mine. I used the money to fully restore my basement, better than it was before. I upgraded to luxury vinyl plank flooring, installed better insulation and moisture barriers, added a permanent sump pump system with battery backup, and upgraded my office setup. The work cost about $30,000. The remaining $55,000 went into savings and investments. Sharon's life, meanwhile, fell apart. Her husband, Greg, filed for divorce in July, apparently having reached his limit with Sharon's drama and the financial liability she'd created. The divorce proceedings revealed that Sharon had racked up significant debt through her various HOA projects and personal spending. Greg wanted out and wanted his share of the home equity before Liberty National could put a lien on the house. Sharon was forced to sell the house to satisfy the divorce settlement and the insurance company's claim. The house sold in September for $420,000. After paying off the mortgage, the divorce settlement, and the debt to Liberty National, Sharon walked away with almost nothing. She moved out of Riverside Meadows in October. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she relocated to an apartment in Littleton and was working part-time at a retail store. Her reign of terror as HOA president had lasted less than 6 months and had cost her everything. The HOA, under Tom Hendricks's leadership, became much more reasonable. Tom instituted new rules requiring transparency for all board actions, mandatory notices for any construction projects, and approval from a majority of board members for expenditures over $500. The architectural committee actually met regularly and considered homeowner input. I stayed on the architectural committee and became more involved in the HOA to make sure nothing like Sharon's abuse of power happened again. Other homeowners did the same, and the community became more engaged and functional. My basement became my sanctuary again. I set up a better home office with a standing desk, multiple monitors, and excellent lighting. My gaming room had a new big screen TV, comfortable furniture, and proper soundproofing. Friends came over regularly to play video games and hang out, and I no longer worried every time it rained. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself, documenting everything, and not being afraid to take legal action when necessary. Sharon had assumed I would roll over and accept the flooding because she had the authority of the HOA behind her. She learned the hard way that HOA authority has limits and that property rights are protected by law. I also learned that homeowners insurance can be more helpful than expected. Liberty National paid me because it was the right thing to do and because they knew they would lose if I sued them for bad faith. The insurance system worked the way it was supposed to work, and I ended up being made whole and then some. My property value actually increased because of the basement improvements. When I had the house reappraised for refinancing in December, the appraiser noted the high-quality basement finishes and the new moisture control systems. My home value went up by $20,000 compared to the pre-flood appraisal. The neighborhood felt different after Sharon left. People were friendlier, less paranoid about HOA rules, and more willing to help each other. The HOA stopped being an adversary and started being what it was supposed to be, a community organization that maintained common areas and helped preserve property values. I ran into Tom Hendricks at the neighborhood pool in August, and we talked about the whole situation. "You know," Tom said, "what happened with Sharon was a wake-up call for a lot of us. We'd been letting her run the show because nobody wanted to deal with the confrontation. You standing up to her gave everyone else permission to do the same." "I did not have much choice," I replied. "She was flooding my house." "True, but you could have just fixed it quietly and moved on. Instead, you held her accountable. That matters." I appreciated Tom's perspective, but honestly, I had just been protecting my home and my investment. The fact that it led to positive change in the community was a bonus. The $85,000 settlement remained the talk of the neighborhood for months. People would bring it up at community events, always with a mix of amazement and satisfaction that Sharon had faced real consequences. A few homeowners even approached me for advice when they had disputes with contractors or insurance companies, and I was happy to share what I had learned. Patricia Holmes sent me a nice bottle of whiskey when the settlement cleared, along with a note thanking me for being an easy client. "You documented everything perfectly," she wrote. "If more clients were like you, my job would be much easier." I kept in touch with Patricia, because you never know when you might need a good lawyer, and I recommended her to several people in the neighborhood who had various legal issues. She ended up representing 3 other homeowners from Riverside Meadows on unrelated matters, all successfully. The drainage pipe that started the whole mess was finally removed in November when the new owners of Sharon's old house did a landscaping renovation. They installed a proper drainage system that directed water to the street through an underground pipe, the way it should have been done in the first place. They even checked with me to make sure their system would not affect my property, which I appreciated. I celebrated Christmas in my fully restored basement, hosting a party for about 20 people from the neighborhood. We played games, watched movies, and enjoyed the space that had been a disaster zone 9 months earlier. Several people commented on how nice the basement looked, and I took pride in showing off the improvements. Looking back, the whole experience was stressful and expensive and time-consuming, but it ultimately worked out in my favor. I ended up with a better basement, $55,000 in the bank, a more functional HOA, and the satisfaction of knowing I had stood up to a bully and won. Sharon's story became a cautionary tale in Riverside Meadows. New board members were reminded of what happened when someone abused their power. Homeowners were more vigilant about board actions and more willing to speak up when something seemed wrong. The community was healthier because of it. I never heard from Sharon directly after she moved out. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. I did not expect one. People like Sharon rarely take responsibility for their actions. They see themselves as victims even when they are clearly the aggressors. I made peace with the fact that Sharon probably still believed she had done nothing wrong and that I had somehow victimized her. What mattered was that justice was done. I was compensated for my damages, and my home was restored. The legal system worked, the insurance system worked, the HOA corrected itself. All the institutions that were supposed to protect homeowners and maintain fairness did their jobs eventually. By spring of 2027, the whole incident felt like ancient history. New people moved into the neighborhood who did not know the story. The HOA was running smoothly with new leadership. My basement was perfect. Life was good. I refinanced my mortgage in March to take advantage of lower interest rates, and the extra equity from my basement improvements meant I got excellent terms. My monthly payment actually went down by $200 while I shortened the loan term by 5 years. The financial benefits of the settlement kept compounding. One afternoon in April, I was working in my basement office when I got an email from a national news website asking if I would be interested in sharing my story. Apparently, HOA horror stories were trending, and someone had posted about my situation on social media. The post had gone viral, and journalists were tracking down details. I declined the interview. I had no interest in becoming the poster child for HOA disputes or in rehashing the drama publicly. The situation was resolved, I was happy, and I saw no benefit to national attention. Some stories are better left at the local level. Tom Hendricks was elected as permanent HOA president in the regular election that April, running unopposed. He had done a good job as interim president, and everyone trusted him to continue leading the community in the right direction. I voted for him enthusiastically. The neighborhood newsletter in May featured an article about property maintenance and drainage best practices. It was clearly inspired by my situation, but did not mention names. The article explained proper drainage techniques, the importance of consulting with neighbors before major projects, and the legal requirements for stormwater management. It was useful information presented in a constructive way. I occasionally drove past Sharon's old house and saw the new owners enjoying their yard. They had kids who played in the backyard where Sharon's failed drainage project had been. The property looked happy and lived in, the way a family home should look. It was a much better outcome than when Sharon lived there, with her perfectly manicured but joyless landscape. My own yard became a bit of a project that summer. I invested some of the settlement money in professional landscaping, installing native plants that required less water and provided habitat for birds and pollinators. I built a small patio area and got a nice grill. I hosted several barbecues for friends and neighbors, enjoying the outdoor space and the sense of community that had been missing during Sharon's reign. The sump pump in my basement ran occasionally during heavy rains, doing its job efficiently and quietly. I had installed a monitoring system that would alert me via text if the pump failed or if water levels got too high. It gave me peace of mind, and I never worried about flooding again. In August, I got a certified letter from Liberty National Insurance confirming that their subrogation case against Sharon had been settled. Sharon had agreed to a payment plan to reimburse the insurance company, which meant she would be paying off the debt for years. The letter thanked me for my cooperation during the claims process and officially closed my file. I filed the letter away in my home office in a folder labeled HOA Dispute Resolved. The folder was thick with documents, photographs, court filings, correspondence, receipts, and settlement agreements. It was a complete record of everything that had happened, preserved in case I ever needed to reference it. I never did need to reference it. The dispute was truly over, and life moved on. By the fall, I was dating someone I met through work. Her name was Julie Richards, and she was a project manager at a tech company in Denver. She was smart, funny, and refreshingly normal. When I told her the story of Sharon and the flooded basement, she laughed and said, "That is the most HOA story I have ever heard." Julie loved my basement setup and spent many evenings there with me, playing games or watching movies. She appreciated that I had turned a disaster into something positive. "A lot of people would have just been bitter and angry," she said. "You actually made your home better." I proposed to Julie on New Year's Eve in my basement, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had supported me through the whole ordeal. She said yes, and we started planning a wedding for the following summer. The Riverside Meadows HOA offered to host our wedding reception in the community clubhouse at no charge, as a gesture of goodwill and appreciation for my continued involvement in the community. We accepted gratefully, and the wedding in July of 2028 was a beautiful event attended by more than 100 people, many from the neighborhood. Tom Hendricks gave a toast at the reception, joking that the marriage was the best thing to come out of the great drainage disaster of 2026. Everyone laughed, and I raised my glass in appreciation. It was true, in a way. The whole experience had taught me resilience, shown me who my real friends were, and given me the financial stability to start this new chapter of my life. Julie and I honeymooned in New Zealand, using some of the settlement money to fund a 3-week adventure. We hiked, explored, and enjoyed being half a world away from HOAs and property disputes. When we returned, we moved into my house together, making it our home. Julie added her own touches to the basement, creating a reading nook with a comfortable chair and good lighting. We hosted game nights regularly, and the basement became the social center of our lives. Friends loved hanging out there, and we built a community within the larger community of Riverside Meadows. The HOA continued to function well under Tom's leadership. There were occasional disputes and disagreements, as there always are in any community organization, but nothing like the chaos of Sharon's brief presidency. The board made decisions transparently, homeowners were engaged and informed, and the neighborhood thrived. I ran into Carol, the woman who had spoken up at the crucial board meeting, at the grocery store one day. She thanked me again for standing up to Sharon. "You really changed things," she said. The HOA is so much better now. People actually want to participate instead of just avoiding the drama. I was just protecting my house, I replied, but I understood what she meant. Sometimes standing up for yourself ends up helping everyone. Years passed. Julie and I had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. The basement became a playroom for a while, filled with toys and children's laughter. Eventually, as the kids grew, it transformed into a homework space and then back into a gaming and entertainment area. The space remained the heart of our home, and I never took for granted that it was dry and functional and comfortable. I never saw or heard from Sharon Pemberton again. Occasionally, I would wonder what happened to her, whether she learned anything from the experience, whether she ever understood that her actions had consequences. But mostly, I did not think about her at all. She was a person who briefly disrupted my life, and then she was gone. The settlement money, invested wisely, grew into a substantial nest egg. Combined with our salaries and careful financial planning, Julie and I were able to pay off the mortgage early and save for our kids' education. The $85,000 from Liberty National Insurance ended up being one of the best things that happened to us financially, even though it came from such a stressful situation. Tom Hendricks eventually stepped down as HOA president after 6 successful years, and a new generation of leadership took over. I served on the board for a term, helping maintain the culture of transparency and accountability that Tom had established. When my term ended, I was happy to step back and let others take the reins. The story of Sharon and the drainage disaster faded into neighborhood legend, told to new residents as a cautionary tale and a reminder of why good HOA governance matters. Some details got exaggerated over time, as stories do, but the core truth remained. An HOA president abused her power, caused damage to a homeowner's property, and faced real consequences. I am writing this now, years later, in my basement office. It is a beautiful space with custom built-in shelves, professional lighting, and all the technology I need for my work. Rain is falling outside, and I can hear the occasional click of the sump pump activating, doing its job exactly as designed. There is no water seeping through the foundation, no panic, no stress. Just the quiet satisfaction of being in a home that is truly mine, protected by law and insurance and a functional community organization. The whole experience taught me that standing up for yourself matters, that documentation and evidence are crucial, that good lawyers are worth their fees, and that insurance companies sometimes actually come through when you need them. It taught me that communities are only as good as the people who participate in them, and that tyrants can only rule if good people stay silent. Sharon Pemberton installed a drainage pipe that flooded my basement. Her insurance paid me $85,000. But more than that, the experience gave me the confidence to advocate for myself, the wisdom to choose my battles carefully, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice, however delayed, eventually prevailed. My home is my castle, dry and secure, and that is worth more than any settlement check.